Hi, students. For today, we are discussing Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 from Case Studies on Diversity and Social Justice Education. Chapter 1, these are both really short chapters, so this lecture is going to be super fast. Chapter 1 is an introduction, and it starts with a story. And basically, all the case studies in here are going to be figured and depicted as stories that are actually based on real life events. Chapter 1 gives you a little bit to consider in terms of macro versus micro. That's discussed on page 3. An idea of how social structures influence individual situations. And the big thing that is coming out from Chapter 1 of Introduction, other than the breakdown of all the chapters, which occurs on page 8, is that there's an idea of the definition of a case method case. This is described in detail on page 6. In reading this section on page 6, you should also remember that these cases, although the chapter divides them up into categories, like Chapter 3 will be on poverty and socioeconomic status, and then Chapter 4 is on religion, Chapter 5 is on ethnicity and culture, Chapter 6 is on race. It's important to note that these cases actually involve a lot of intersectionality. So there are intersections of multiple identities and oppressions, even though they are cataloged under a certain and very specific topic header. So keep that in mind. This notion of a case method case is actually a type of story or narrative usually based on actual events and told with a definitive teaching purpose. And it actually reminds me of our textbook here. Is Everyone Really Equal? Because this one also starts with storytelling. So you're going to get a lot more of that in this book as well. It's important when you're reading through this textbook to think critically, listen to the points being made, evaluate arguments, review alternative courses of action. And the introduction highlights that the point is to muddle through the gray areas. There is no right or wrong answer in these cases. So we're erasing binaries. And then you want to reconsider old ways of thinking in light of new understandings. Chapter 2 is the framework, analyzing cases using the equity literacy framework. And this is actually the textbook I'm asking all the students to work from for the collaborative group presentation. You're going to use the framework in Chapter 2 to pick a case study or a case story from one of the sections and find a way to arrive at a more equitable outcome. In Chapter 2, there are terms I've listed in the PDF lecture that you should know. such as equity literacy framework, micro level and macro level, and finally equity literacy abilities. And there's two main pictures tables that are important on page 12 and 13. And I have outlined the 7 steps in the equity literacy case analysis approach in your PDF lecture that accompanies this video. So step 1 is to identify the biases. And so they are asking you to understand implicit and unintentional hidden biases, as well as very obvious biases in the stories that are going to follow. Step 2 is to take stock of the different perspectives. So it asks you to analyze the situations through multiple lenses, understanding how all people are feeling in the situation. Step 3 is to consider possible challenges and opportunities. So it's a little bit of a listing here. So what are the challenges with, say, 3 perspectives in the story, and what are our opportunities to find a way to work through some of these challenges? Step 4 is the most important to me. You have to be able to imagine an equitable outcome. If you cannot consider the situation, you can't even consider a better situation, then you will never achieve any kind of social equity for our society. And on page 18 of your textbooks, there is an important definition, explanation of the differences between equity and equality and why we use equity. So make sure you pay attention to that. Step 5 is to brainstorm immediate term responses for how to deal with the situation, something that will help right away. Step 6 is to brainstorm the longer term policy and practice adjustments. This is the macro level of work, and it is the harder work to implement. So if you're considering the free write assignment, where I ask you to look at a macro level, such as how to reframe a hiring practice. For a lot of us, we can't think outside of our frame of hiring employees always looks a certain way. So that's step 6. Step 7 is to craft a plan of action. How do you respond? How do you implement? What are the different roles people can take? So it's more of a layout of the plan. If you have any questions on these 2 chapters, let me know. And in terms of the collaborative group work, how it will work is, say, my group decides we want to do case study 7.1 in chapter 7, boys versus girls trivia contest. We will make sure our group reads the case. We will explain the 7 steps from chapter 2 in terms of the equity literacy case analysis approach. We will ask the students to engage in some kind of an activity related to it. And of course, we will apply some kind of outside research to the topics. And you would divide that pretty evenly. Hopefully, it has to be equitable within your groups. And I will be working with you all as well. As always, if you have questions, please feel free to email me. You're going to really enjoy this book. It is very user-friendly, and you're going to say, wait a minute, I've read something about this. This has happened. And that is the point of the entire book. And I should point out before I end this lecture that at the end, students always forget this, there's an appendix, Appendix A, which gives you the literary case analysis worksheet that you can use. And then Appendix B is additional points for consideration for each case study. So make sure when you're reading to go back and look at the accompanying point and points for consideration.